Hey everyone, it's Scott Gerfen, and this is OSBA's Leading the Way podcast. We're getting closer and closer to the OSBA Capital Conference and Trade Show, November 10th through the 12th at the Greater Columbus Convention Center. This is the premier training opportunity for Ohio school board members and provides excellent learning opportunities for district administrators and staff. You can get more details and get registered at conference.ohioschoolboards.org. Hope to see you there. Well, we're grateful to have Pappas and Associates for sponsoring this podcast. And today, the firms Will Schwartz and Alex Mormon are here to give us all some insight into Ohio's education policy landscape. So, Will, before we get into everything going on at the Statehouse, I want to talk to you a little about Pappas and Associates. What role do you guys all play in helping shape policy?
Sure. Pappas and Associates is a government relations consulting firm that helps clients navigate the Statehouse and be successful. We also provide clients association management services, but we are proud to represent clients from Fortune 100 companies, healthcare organizations, state and local nonprofits, energy companies, locally elected officials, as well as education organizations. Of note, the Buckeye Association of School Administrators, which represents the school superintendents, the Alliance for High Quality Education, which largely represents the suburban school superintendents, Ohio CCS, which represents the comprehensive and compact schools, so traditional school districts that provide CTE education either in the traditional school setting or with a compact of other schools, and Cretus, which is a technology company that helps keep schools, students, and staff safe.
So, Will, a lot of our listeners are going to be obviously very interested in the school levies that are appearing on the ballot. There are, I think, around 143 issues. Levies historically have faced challenges. What are you seeing this year in terms of levy support?
Well, Scott, it's sort of a return to the pre-COVID days in terms of the numbers of school levy requests. During COVID, there was a sizable dip below 100 levy requests in November. We're, as you said, above 140 this year, below the 166 that we had last year in 2023. But schools are kind of returning to normal in terms of the regular requests of voters, depending on the school district. Of those 143 that we've got on the ballot this year, 44% are renewals. So those are instances in which school districts are not asking taxpayers for more money, but simply to remain at the same funding level they had to continue a levy that was set to expire. So this spring featured one of the greatest levy defeats that we've seen in a long time. Much of that, I think, is attributed to the property valuation increases that the counties have been experiencing last year, this year, and perhaps next year, and the resulting feelings that that's having on homeowners across the state as values are going up and the impact it's having on families. So we'll continue to monitor this and see if there are any trends that we can glean from the results in November. But in terms of school districts, returning to the ballot in terms of numbers, I think we're back to normal pre-COVID times.
When you mention renewal levies, those traditionally do well, right? Those are the levies that do well.
Absolutely.
But even you were saying, I just wanted to touch back on a point you made about last spring. They did not do even. Did they do well at that point?
Levies of all types really were less successful than normal, and renewals, as you're correct, fare much better than new money requests. New money requests fail 7 out of 10 times in the last 10 years, looking at levy data. And so when school districts have to go to the voters and property owners, farmers and others, they know that it's a tall order to be successful. And so I think that's taken into consideration when they're asking for new money. But those renewals have a far higher success rate, 60-70% success rate for renewal issues.
So right after the election, we enter what's known as the lame duck session at the Statehouse. Alex, what's at stake during this period? And it runs till December when they close out, right?
Yes, it does. And I think both chambers have put out their session schedules. Senate's meeting, I think it's 3 times. The House is meeting 4 times. House has a couple, if needed, sessions if they feel so compelled to come back. I think really what we're going to see is, depending on the caucus vote and the House Republicans, what that speaker's race kind of looks like and who's going to control is really going to shape what that lame duck looks like, and if it's going to be very efficient, get a lot of things done, or if it's going to be a little bit more of what we've seen over the past 2 years where things are kind of slowed down.
So in terms of the speaker race, we have who's up for that?
So current speaker Jason Stevens is running to be the speaker again, but also Senate President Matt Hoffman is moving back over to the House, and he's also running for the speakers.
I wanted to get into some of the bills that could appear during the lame duck session. The first one I want to talk about is the Career Tech Licensure Bill. That's House Bill 432. Can you kind of talk about that, at least what that means?
Yeah, absolutely. So this bill has been a long time coming. I think overall we've heard about the teacher shortages overall in all cases, but I think especially in the career tech fields, as we've seen kind of this expansion and this growth with the DeWine Husted administration's investments into those fields, there's been a lack of keeping up with teaching there. Lots of that is because you have people who are in the industry who have the knowledge and expertise but don't have a teaching certificate. So to get them into the classroom has kind of been a barrier. So 432 really kind of creates these alternative pathways for these teachers to get licensed to come into the classroom. I think Rep. Don Jones is carrying this bill, and he's put a lot of work in a couple years into shaping this bill into the way it is. It passed the House 84-6. It's just had the sponsor hearing in the Senate, but likely this bill will be one that is pretty non-controversial. So it's more than likely going to get some other things thrown in there.
There's a few other bills I want to talk about, and these are probably ones that the media is paying more attention to. Will, first up, the bathroom bill, as it's called, Senate Bill 104. How might this legislation impact school districts?
Well, Senate Bill 104 really is two kind of actions away from becoming law. It's pending in the Senate, awaiting a concurrence vote, which Senate President Matt Huffman has indicated will happen likely before Thanksgiving. And Governor Mike DeWine has indicated that he will sign this should it reach his desk. And what this means for schools, parents, families, is that if you are a student in a public or private K-12 school or a public or private higher education of institution, there will now be restrictions on the use of multi-occupancy restrooms, locker rooms, and other facilities such that individuals of one biological sex cannot use those facilities for those designated for another biological sex. There's also restrictions on those institutions designating multi-occupancy facilities for non-gendered individuals or open to all genders. So some additional restrictions in terms of how those facilities are utilized, maintained, so on and so forth. So we anticipate this to be signed into law this calendar year, and based on other states' experience, will likely be litigated thereafter.
Another bill that's getting a lot of attention, the LifeWise bill. Tell me a little bit about that.
Sure. So this is House Bill 445. There's also a companion bill in the Senate. But House Bill 445 really has had the most attention since its introduction. And it deals with the topic of release time for religious instruction, which has been a topic that has been permitted by the U.S. Supreme Court in a court ruling. And the law right now in Ohio is such that school boards of education are allowed to decide whether or not to allow students to leave school during the school day to be released for religious instruction off-site. Many school districts across the state allow students to do so. They have a policy allowing students to do that, but not all. And so what House Bill 445 and its sponsors and supporters seek to do is close that gap so that all school districts in the state would have a policy requiring students to be allowed to have release time for religious instruction off-site. And LifeWise is one of those organizations that's been a strong supporter of this. They've got the big red bus, the red shirts. They've been active in many boards of education across the state debating this issue and trying to urge the members of the boards of education to change their policies if they've not, or if they do have a policy allowing it, to keep that policy in place. And this is something, Scott, it's a national movement here. It's not just in Ohio, and I think it's expected that if this is not successful in the lame duck legislative session, that this will be hotly pursued by folks in the General Assembly through the operating budget process. So I think you're likely to see this either be successful, perhaps not in the bill form itself, but perhaps in another bill in the lame duck legislative session or in the operating budget by June 30th next year.
Well, the term parental rights, I mean, that really gained traction during COVID, and that's the subject of House Bill 8, right?
That's correct. That's also a national movement, the Parents' Bill of Rights. It's not just Ohio, it's other states across the country. The state of Florida was one of the first states that, addressed this issue, which ultimately led to litigation. And the drafters and legislators who are working on this legislation are looking to Florida and its experience in other states to modify this bill. It's House Bill 8. House Bills 1 through 12 were priority bills for the House chamber. It cleared the House. Previously, it's now pending in the Senate Education Committee, where it awaits a committee vote, followed then by a Senate vote, and then a House concurrence vote to then go to the governor, all of which we believe will likely happen either November or December of this year. So we anticipate that this not only will be passed, but also, as the case might be with some of the other bills that the General Assembly is considering to pass, might also be litigated as well after the fact.
What's some of the impact, though, that this could have on school operations? I mean, if it does pass.
I think schools are going to need to consult their legal counsel about the operations of this. There are considerable new requirements in terms of parental involvement policies, monitoring in terms of substantial changes to students' health or well-being, and notifications to parents when those instances arise. In many cases, these things are happening in schools already, but this is providing kind of a state framework to support schools in those efforts. But it will be certainly a challenge for school districts to understand the new arena in which they'll be operating to make sure that they're complying with the new provisions of the law.
Well, a couple other bills I wanted to ask you about: House Bill 407, the private school accountability bill, and Senate Bill 29, which is related to technology, right?
Yeah. So House Bill 407 is a Republican-sponsored bill in the House. Gail Manning and Bill Seitz, who are looking at providing some academic and financial accountability measures to our state scholarship programs. The costs of which are right around $1 billion a year, and so they're looking at providing some accountability measures for parents and for taxpayers and the public to understand more about these programs. So that bill is pending in House committee, but I know that Representative Seitz is term limited, won't be returning, and I imagine we'll be making a push for this in some capacity along with Gail Manning in the lame duck legislative session.
So when you talk about accountability, what does that mean? What's going on now that they're not accountable?
Sure. So students receiving a state scholarship under one of the 5 scholarship programs are allowed to take different tests than the public school students are required to take. So this would require the same test to be applied to those students, which had been law up until 2019. It would also require the reporting data of those tests to be reported at the same time as traditional public schools in September, rather than by February 1st of that year, as well as some data around the income levels of students taking the scholarships and things like that. So providing more information that the State Department of Education and Workforce might have, but has not really produced in a full, comprehensive manner to this point. So Senate Bill 29 is really top of mind for school leaders across the state. It takes effect October 24th, and it prohibits school districts from accessing or monitoring student communications on school-issued devices with certain exceptions. One of those exceptions is for educational purposes, to prevent or respond to a threat to a student's safety, responding to a judicial warrant if the device is missing or stolen, to comply with state or federal laws or funding programs. But every time that those exceptions are triggered, a notice has to be made to parents, and a written notification. And so schools use a variety of technology tools to monitor students to make sure that they're on task, or whether or not they've written something in a paper about suicidal ideations or harming themselves or others, and that those trigger their software notification systems that there might be a there. Every time those pings happen in the system, it requires a notice to parents under Senate Bill 29. And so I think what you'll expect to see from school leaders and from legislators in lame duck is a modification to that law such that only when a notification occurs in the system and school districts initiate action based on that triggering notice, do parents then need to be notified of those instances. So right now, it's a lot of notifications being made to parents when this will pare it back considerably based on the proposal that's going to be offered to the General Assembly in lame duck.
So Alex, next year begins a new budget cycle, at least planning for it, for the state of Ohio. The state operates on a 2-year budget plan. What changes should we expect in leadership for the Senate and the House, and how that's going to maybe impact the budget process?
No, absolutely. I think, the past couple times we've had a budget, we've gone past that June 30 deadline. I think all indications would be that, Senator Rob McCulley is going to take over as president of the Senate. Senator Jerry Serino is going to take over as the chair of finance. Senator Andy Brenner going to stay education chair. I think so. The Senate's going to have a lot more stability, I think, going through the budget process. I think depending on how this House Speaker's race between Stevens and Huffman kind of shakes out, Stevens coming straight from a previous role being the Speaker, and then also with Matt Huffman having the relationships he has over in the Senate, I think it'll be a pretty smooth process, smoother than maybe the past few. The leadership changes, we don't know what the leadership teams are going to look like in either of those right now, especially with the Speaker's race going on. Those can typically be used as bartering chips. But, we're still going to have Rep. Jones, Rep. Byrd, Rep. Manning, all as those education mainstays in the House after this year.
So tell me a little bit about the timeline. I guess the budget releases in February, and then you got to have it done basically the end of June, right?
Well, you're supposed to. Like I said, we've had a couple continuing resolutions so that get done in like the first week or two of July. But I think, the governor is already having those conversations with his cabinets about what their priorities are and kind of working through that process. I think we'll get that introduction, like you said, in February. It'll probably be end of April, early May that the House gets theirs done and sends it over to the Senate. And then, that last week or two of June is when they get into that conference committee and really kind of hash out those final details of what the budget's going to look like. Yeah,
and the governor is the one who releases. It's his budget that comes out in February, and this is really going to be his legacy budget, right? It's his last budget. What does that mean in terms of implications for long-term education policy?
Well, as Governor DeWine said, pretty much every time he's campaigned, he tells the story about how his grandpa used to plant trees, and his grandpa never got to see the fruits of that labor, but it was the investment and the time that it took to kind of build those trees that's appreciated for future generations. I think we're going to see a lot of focus on kids and education in this budget. Governor DeWine in his last State of the State was talking about kids and career tech and making sure kids can get glasses if they need glasses. So I think there's going to be a lot of focus on that future investment for those younger generations so that they have a better state to live in.
When you look at the upcoming budget, we're talking about a revenue shortfall, right? Even though there is a cash balance of around $1 billion?
Yeah, right around the $1 billion. And I think, the shortfall that we're seeing is probably closely linked, if not explicitly linked, to the cut in the income tax, which they may try to do again this budget. But I think we're going to see some different maneuvering. I'd say that there's probably not going to be a lot. Like for example, Career Tech got $300 million for Career Tech expansion grants. I think we're not going to see so much of those programs. So it's going to be a lot of shifting and moving dollars, which will also likely make this budget process a little more tedious in kind of those rooms and those negotiations on where the money should really go.
Obviously, our listeners are familiar with the school funding formula. Where is that, and what's going to happen, you think, here in this next 2-year budget?
Well, Scott, it's important to, while talking about where we might go, to talk about where we've been. Roughly 7 years ago, 2 legislators, a Republican, Bob Cupp, a Democrat, John Patterson, got together and talked about how do we change the way that we enact school funding formulas in the state. And they created the Cupp-Patterson Fair School Funding Plan, which was a 6-year plan that the state has now funded years 1 through 4. The first operating budget funded years 1 and 2. the current budget that we're in right now was years 3 and 4. And so the conversation in the upcoming budget debate will be whether the state can fund years 5 and 6. And it's not merely do we continue funding that, but it's also do we update the inputs to that formula as well. And all of these things take resources. You mentioned, the budget shortfall. Our tax revenues missed estimates by $485 million in fiscal year 24, and the Office of Budget Management further revised downward the fiscal year 25 projections by over $300 million. So the revenue projections are going to be top of mind for any legislator deciding how do we appropriate funds for the operating budget. And K-12 education represents 42% of state source spending in the operating budget in a given year. So education is the largest piece of the pie among any other area just for state funding. But it's certainly going to be a heavy lift for finding the available resources and the cost of updating the inputs, continuing and fully phasing in the plan, as well as the other modifications to the formula as well. So it's going to be quite the large lift moving forward, but we'll see where things go.
Yeah, it looks like there's just a lot that our listeners are going to have to pay attention to. I mean, especially in the lame duck, and then a lot of work to be done. I mean, considering the end of the lame duck, and then you got the budget season coming up. So, Will, Alex, thanks for coming on the podcast.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks again to Pappas and Associates for being our sponsors here.